When we analyzed the perfectly competitive market earlier, we looked at the graph for the entire market and simultaneously looked at the graph for a single producer within that market. Now, recall in a perfectly competitive market, the word competitive comes from the fact that there are many producers making the exact same product and many consumers buying that product. Okay, so this single producer is just one of many making up the supply of our product. And therefore, this producer doesn't exert any market power, meaning this producer doesn't have any control over the price of the product she is selling. Instead, the price of the product is determined by the interaction of all the producers and all the consumers interacting with each other. So the interaction of supply and demand gives us our equilibrium price of our product, P star, and tells us how many economic transactions will actually occur in this market. Okay, and then our producer is what we call a price taker. She looks at the market and sees what the market price is and takes that as her marginal revenue line. By setting her marginal revenue line equal to her marginal cost of production, she is able to determine how much she should produce, we'll call it little q star, in order to maximize her profits. Each of the many producers has their own q star that they've chosen to produce at, and when added up together, all those little q stars equal this large q star. When we instead analyze a monopolistic market, we no longer have many producers of the product. Instead, we're only going to have a single producer of the product. And therefore, we're going to be able to combine our two graphs into one, because this market supply is going to be provided by just this one producer. In a monopoly market, there's only one producer, so the entire market supply curve is going to be represented by the marginal cost curve of the single producer. Since there's only one producer, this producer or our monopolist faces the entire market demand for the product. So she provides the product to all the consumers. Now, in the perfectly competitive market, any one particular producer was a price taker and simply charged for their product whatever the going market price was, and that producer would have no market power over that price. The monopolist, on the other hand, has significant power over the market price. And if the monopolist charges a slightly higher price, then her sales drop a little bit, but not completely. And looking at it from the other side, if the monopolist wants to increase her sales, she wants the consumers to buy more of her product, then she has to lower the price somewhat. In other words, the marginal revenue that the monopolist can earn at different levels of production is going to be decreasing in the level of production, and it's going to be represented by this downward sloping line. The more product the monopolist wants to sell, the lower must be the price at which she sells the product. Now, just like any producer in any market, whether it be a monopoly market or a perfectly competitive market, the producer is going to maximize their profits by producing at the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So recall the supply curve represents the marginal cost of production, okay, and then our marginal revenue is captured by this line here. So by setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue, the monopolist chooses the profit maximizing level of production, which is right here. So we'll call that QM for monopoly. And now the monopolist must decide what price to charge for the product in order to sell this quantity QM. And she's going to charge the highest price she can get away with. And that's going to be determined by the demand curve for the product. So remember, the demand curve tells us the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity that consumers are willing to buy of that product. Okay, so if the monopolist charges too high of a price, then she won't be able to sell all of the QM units she produces. If she charges too low of a price, then the demand is going to be greater than QM, and she'll have long lines outside her store. So she's going to figure out exactly the right price to charge, the maximum price that she can get away with. And so at a quantity of QM, she'll be able to charge the price determined by the demand curve, which is right here. And we'll call it PM for monopoly price. So to recap, the monopolist first decides how much to produce by setting marginal cost equal to marginal revenue, which occurs right here. Secondly, the monopolist decides the price to sell at in order to exactly move QM units of the product. Okay, so that's going to be the highest price that consumers are willing to pay for quantity QM. Now, to see why consumers don't like monopoly markets, why they're worse off in a monopoly market, let's compare the price and quantity outcome in the monopoly market to what we got when we were looking at a perfectly competitive market. So in a perfectly competitive market, the price of the product would be determined by the interaction of market supply and market demand. So the equilibrium price would be where supply equals demand right here. And this would be P star, the market price. And at P star, we would have Q star number of economic transactions. Okay, so clearly under a monopoly market, the market price is higher than in a competitive market. And this is exactly because there's only one producer, and that producer exerts influence. There's no competing producers driving down the market price. Okay? As a result of the higher price, there's also fewer economic transactions that occur. Okay, so there's going to be fewer consumers that end up getting the product compared to a perfectly competitive market. Okay? The individual who benefits from a monopoly market is obviously the monopolist herself, this one producer. And the consumers would be clearly better off in a perfectly competitive market.